And Dan has been polling. You've been polling, finding out what the public reaction is to what's going on.
Yeah, so we've been looking at what do GBNews viewers think about the strike action. And what we were looking at is, on Monday, the MPs in the Commons voted through new legislation, minimal service levels legislation. And what that will do is mean that there has to be a certain level of train run even when there's strike action, for example. And what we found is that 62% of GBNews viewers support that legislation. They support Rishi Sunak in his bid to basically stop strikes from bringing the country to a standstill.
The question is, would it actually do that? Would it actually stop these strikes that we're experiencing now? And we heard, as you say, in the Commons on Monday, Jacob Rees-Mogg also, critical of the legislation, saying actually it was really badly written.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Labour's arguing as well. They say, look, this legislation already exists in countries in Europe, in France, for example, and they say, actually, it makes no difference. This might sound good, but it has no real impact. If anything, the unions, they're arguing that this legislation will make things worse. They say it may mean that there's this minimal service, that means that there will be some trains that operate when there are train strikes, that means that schools can't shut completely when there's education strikes, etc. But they say all this will do is mean that there are more strike days, so there could be unintended consequences to this.
Interesting. It will be really interesting to see how public opinion responds to this first school strike in England and Wales. And it's interesting so far. I think the Ipsos polling has the public generally on side at the moment, 40% OK with the public sector strikes. But whether or not this, what's being termed a mini lockdown, people seeing kids going through what they did during the lockdown, whether or not that might shift public opinion. We know that teachers are paid in real terms worse, in terms of the cuts, worse than nurses and paramedics as well.
Yeah, I think a bit like our NHS and what people think about NHS stuff, I think a lot of the public know that our teachers did an awful lot during lockdown. Even when schools went open, they were still helping students by... Some schools were staying open for those students who had to go in there so that their parents could go to work, or they were doing online lessons. So I think the public has an awful lot of sympathy with teachers, more than they do with, for example, university lecturers who are going on strike.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. When the more this strike action happens, the more that I think people could end up getting fed up with this.
Yeah, the more it affects individual lives. That's the thing. The one that would really annoy me would be border control, whether it's a port or whether it's an airport. That could be really inconvenient.
Yeah, and we saw that they took strike action just before Christmas, really disrupted people's Christmas holidays. And they will be covered by this minimum service level legislation. And Rishi Sunak is trying to use that legislation to stop that for exactly that reason, so that people who are trying to go on holiday, for example, do not have their plans completely ruined at the last minute when they're trying to get abroad.
Well, the army kind of showed up border control, didn't they? It was hugely successful. People were actually saying they did a better job, ushered through more quickly. I was just looking at Sarah Vine there, top of the Daily Mail. Does anyone give a fig about all of us hard-working taxpayers whose lives are being wrecked by strikes? And she's got a really interesting column today saying, it seems to be you're either in one camp or the other. You're into the protest or you're just cracking on, working hard, but just kind of getting used to the daily disruption.
Yeah, and I think that is what people find most frustrating, and I think today will really show that for people, because of the sheer size of the number of strikes that are happening. Everything is being disrupted. If you're a worker, you find that you can't get your train to work today, so you're going to have to work from home. But then your child's school is on strike, so you've now got to deal with a childcare issue while trying to work from home at the same time. If you have a loved one who uses the NHS, then you're going to find that that's also being disrupted at points over these strikes. And I think that's what's really going to get to people. It's not just individual issues, it's that every bit of life seems to be being disrupted at the moment.
And we can't see, Dan, any signs of breakthrough on any fronts. I mean, the thing is, we can talk about these disruptions and continuing strikes, but there doesn't seem to be any common ground.
Stalemate. We're at complete stalemate. And the government will point to the fact that we've seen inflation starting to come down, as this is proof as to why we can't give in now and give pay rises. They say, we've said we get inflation under control, we can then give you the pay rises we need.
It's the Bank of England's job to get inflation under control. I always think it's a bit of a cop-out when they say that.
Yes, and I think there has been some frustration amongst some people, particularly on opposition benches in the House of Commons, that the government has said that their aim is to halve inflation this year. And Labour going, well, hold on a minute. You've not got much to do with that. And when inflation was going up, you blame the Bank of England. Now it's coming down. You're taking all the credit for it.
Interesting. All right, Dan, thank you very much.
Dan Falvey is our head of digital news here at GB News. He's always interested to hear from you, so get in touch the usual ways. Running any other polls today? Anything anybody can take part in?
That's the only one for now, but I'm sure we'll have one going later in the day.
How people are feeling about the school strikes, how it's going, something like that, because I know, certainly in my case, one of my children's classes we've been told will be closed, the other one will be open. That kind of even more confuses the childcare situation. I'd be interested maybe to get a little flavour of how people are feeling about it.
We can certainly get that up and running and see what our viewers think.
Great.
Yeah, is that poll still open there?
That poll is now shut, this one.
Shut, yeah. OK, my friend. Thank you. And so are you. You're not shut.